Good evening to All Saints Bayside and to Father Larry Byrne, who I've known for decades. Thank you for this invitation. To Reverend Marjorie Bowden Edmonds, to the vestry, and to everyone who's attending. Thanks for the chance to gather. Your hearts are open to God, your minds are open to possibilities, and your doors are open to all at All Saints Episcopal Bayside. And in that spirit, you've gathered for this conversation about what next? What can we do to confront gun violence? And I hope to contribute to that conversation tonight. Isaiah 58 teaches, "Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in." That message is what inspires all of us to come together and to try and confront gun violence, the desire to restore our streets to being places where children can play without fear of violence. You're guided in this discussion tonight by my friend Father Larry and some experts to address this tough subject. And I know we are all gathered knowing the pain in our hearts and in our communities from gun violence. What I want to stress is that we who are elected know what's happening. We see the violence in our streets and the bloodshed and know we have to act to find ways to address the challenge, even the horror of gun violence. This issue knows no boundaries, from sprawling cities to tight-knit rural towns, from the aisles of our grocery stores to the desk-filled classrooms of our schools. The presence of gun violence in our communities is a real threat, and for many, a tragic daily reality. In Bayside, 2 recent shootings left a pair of teenagers injured, including a boy shot leaving Cardozo High School. Here in my hometown of Wilmington, a 14-year-old boy and a bank executive just walking home from work both recently lost their lives to stray rounds to gun violence. Nearly 40,000 Americans every year die in gun violence, and the burden of that falls particularly heavily on Black and Hispanic communities. We have to do more at every level of our community, our government, and our nation to better equip law enforcement with the tools they need to confront this threat and manage it head on, to invest in grassroots outreach, in mental health services, in promoting trauma-informed public health services, and respect the foundations of our nation. This is a tough balancing act. We have to remember that at the very founding of this country and our Constitution is enshrined a right of access to firearms for citizens of the United States in our Second Amendment. But I'll tell you that funeral after funeral that I've attended here in my hometown has made it more and more painfully clear. We have to balance respecting that Second Amendment right with providing the same level of respect for human life and minimizing the carnage. Recently, a new conservative majority in the Supreme Court has made critical decisions impacting this issue. They overturned a century-old New York gun control measure that restricted concealed carrying of firearms. And I know that many of us in Congress are concerned about the direction the Supreme Court might take and on how we make progress on this very divisive issue. We passed in June, through significant bipartisan cooperation, hard work, the most significant gun reform bill in decades that also invests billions in community mental health. It strengthens background checks for America's youngest gun buyers. It closes the so-called boyfriend loophole. It incentivizes states to pass red flag laws that will make it easier to take guns out of the hands of those who pose an imminent threat to themselves and others, and invests billions in mental health and community violence intervention programming. I've personally worked with bipartisan groups of senators to introduce and pass legislation, like the NICS Denial Notification Act, and I've introduced Democrat-only bills, like the Preventing and Addressing Trauma and Health Services Act, that has no prospect of passage but shows the direction I think we should go. NICS Denial Notification is a bill I worked on with Senators Toomey and Cornyn to make sure that those who are prohibited from getting a weapon, if they go into a gun store and lie on their background check and try to get a gun, local law enforcement is notified. The other bill I referenced would increase access to crucial mental health resources. President Biden has a long record of working to address the issues of gun violence for decades. And more recently as president, he's called for $32 billion in additional investments in this coming year's budget to strengthen police, to strengthen the background check system, to strengthen community violence interruption, and to help fund community resilience. He's also enacted more than 24 executive orders to try and work to reduce gun violence. There is so much more we can and must do at the community level, at the city and state level, and at the federal level. And as I mentioned, we have to balance our respect for the Second Amendment while making our nation and community safer. We can get closer to that reality when leaders like Father Larry and folks such as yourselves make your voices heard. So let me urge you to get engaged, to be engaged at the local and the federal level, to make sure that every time there is another senseless gun tragedy, we understand the sense of urgency that you feel, and we keep working together. I believe we've made real progress this year, but we are a long way from making the difference that this moment demands and that our communities deserve. So I hope you will have a respectful, vigorous, and robust conversation tonight where you'll talk through the many causes of gun violence, whether it's their contributions to suicide, to accidental death through a lack of gun safety, or the instances, tragically, where guns are used to kill others. We have to balance that with the realization that for millions of Americans, guns are an important part of a sporting life or of protecting their families and their homes. And in this conversation you're going to have this evening, I hope you'll follow up by working through Father Larry to get to me the conclusions you reach so that I can work with your congressional delegation, with our president, and with others in Congress to try and make a meaningful difference. Thank you for your attention and engagement tonight, and I hope you have a great conversation.